Today we're going to be talking about slow pitch jigging. We're going to take a look at some rods and reels that you can use for slow pitching, and we'll look at some slow pitch jigs, and we'll spend some time talking about techniques. I'm joined with my two friends, Anthony and Ceasar. You guys already know Anthony from previous bluefin tuna videos, yellowtail videos, one of the most knowledgeable and articulate people in the fishing industry that I've ever met, and so very grateful to have Anthony on here tonight. I also have my friend Ceasar from Phenix Rods, is a rod designer, is a SoCal legend, and is actually responsible for designing the Titan rod, which we'll showcase here in just a little bit. We're gonna jump right into it, and I just wanted to ask Ceasar, what is slow pitch jigging? And maybe if you can contrast that to the high-speed vertical jigging, which most of us in Southern California are familiar with.
Okay, so the whole jigging scene started in Asia, technically in Japan, probably about 35, 40 years ago. But the big thing is, it started off as high-speed vertical jigging. And over a period of time, people realized that to high-speed vertical jig, you need to be physically fit and have very good stamina. Such a fast, violent, repetitive motion that a lot of people couldn't do it. And that's when they started coming out with the slow pitch jigging. It was a lot mellower, a lot slower action. A broader group of people could fish it, and they found it was very effective. However, now what we do out here in Southern California is neither true slow pitch fishing or true slow high-speed vertical jigging. What we do out here is more of a hybridized jigging format. Our high-speed jiggers don't really jig as fast as a true vertical speed. The jigs they use are not true vertical speed jigs. And our slow pitch fishing, we don't really fish traditional slow pitch. Traditional slow pitch, if you look at some of the Japanese videos, you'll see the guys don't really move the rods that much. It's almost like a quarter, half turn twist of the reel and a very mild pump, which it's very effective in very heavily pressured water where you need the jig to be slow. But out here, most of us you see who slow pitch fish actually work it pretty quick. Not as fast as vertical speed, but not a true slow.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, just to give you a little background, when I was prepping for this video, I kind of threw it out to both of these guys about defining slow pitch jigging, and they just laughed at me. It's such a broad, hard to define thing, and so thank you, Ceasar, for just kind of briefly touching on what exactly it is. It's really hard to pin down. In a nutshell, that's
yeah. I mean, traditional slow pitch fishing is very, very slow. I mean, they'll turn the handle quarter turn, half turn, maybe every 5 to 10 seconds. I mean, if we were to work a jig that slow out here, we'd be stuck on the bottom all the time. So there's no such thing as a true slow pitch fishing out here anymore. Everything's more hybridized, even though everybody calls it slow pitch fishing. If you look at the action they work, and you talk to the guys in Japan that actually truly fish the slow pitch, they'll be shaking their heads going, no, that's not true slow pitch fishing.
Thank you so much, Ceasar, for that, for sharing your knowledge. I'm so honored to be standing in between these two guys tonight. I just get to stand here and smile. But without any further ado, I wanted to ask Anthony if you could talk about rods and reels and some jigs. So take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Benji. So we have a few different rods and reels and definitely some jigs that we offer at our store. Your local shop, they'll have different variances of the same stuff. If they don't carry it, just call around till you find the closest store that does. You want to get into the stores and spend some time looking at the different rods and the different reels that you want to purchase for this. Most of them are pretty hefty investments. On the rods, they're typically very short rods and they feel like very light bass rods. Some will even feel like a heavy trout rod. But believe it or not, we're going to be pulling in some pretty good sized fish on this really light gear. These things are feather light. When you hold them, they're not heavy at all. Maybe, Ceasar, how many ounces you think the light one goes for?
The ultralight, I think we paired the spinning model with a, I want to say it was a Vanford 3000. I think it came in just under like 7 ounces rod and reel.
Yeah, wow. So we're a third of a pound with the reel. I mean, that's crazy when you think about how light these setups are and the size of the fish that we can fish with them. Some of your popular brands here on the West Coast are going to be stuff like Phenix rods. They're a staple out here. They cover every single species of fish you could possibly want to catch out here on the West Coast, and they do it very well. Another brand that is relatively new to the West Coast, but has done a really good job in Japan, Australia, and on the West Coast has been the Ocean Legacy brand. And then for the more price point friendly stuff, there's some other options like Star rods. they've definitely hit the market with some good offerings for guys that are trying to get into it, see what it's about, and decide whether they want to go all in or not. Your rods are typically short, like we touched upon, anywhere from a 5.5 to a 6 foot rod, maybe a couple inches above is fine. And like I said, they're going to be very light, moderate actions. On the reels, you're looking for a very narrow reel, anything very narrow. The biggest decision you guys are going to have to make is going to be, do you go with a star drag or do you go with a lever drag option? The advantage to the lever drags is they do come with 2-speed options. And with the star drag, as of now, there's no 2-speed star drags on the market available. So we have a few different options on the reels. We have, if you want to keep it into a fairly price point range, the Penn Fathoms. They come in right or left-handed, very, very narrow. You're going to have the 15 extra narrow if you want a reel that's going to cover a wide variety of stuff. And if you want to do something for shallow water rockfish and fishing sand bass and calico bass on the slow pitch, which is very effective and very fun, they go all the way down to like a 10 on the Penn Fathom. When you get into your higher end stuff, they have the Ocea Jigger. That's going to be a very popular reel for the slow pitch. They have the 4,000, the 2,500, and the 1,500. All three of those sizes will cover everything we need to do here in SoCal. The 4,000 guys are catching large tuna on it. If you go down to the 2,500, you could handle your yellowtail and mid-range rockfish. And then if you go to the 1,500, that's what we recommend for your calicos, sand bass, shallow water rockfish, and anything else you want to throw with where you don't need a lot of line capacity. Other than that, the Penn Torque, the 15 extra narrow, is another classic if you want to spend some money and get the 2-speed option. If you know you're going to be fishing some bigger fish and that 2-speed might come in handy, or if you're going to be fishing some really deep water stuff, the 15 extra narrow would be a good option. And then when you go over to accurate, they actually make some slow pitch reels. It's going to be the Valiant slow pitch. So they'll come in the 5,000, or they'll have it in the 500 or the 300 sizes. Very, very narrow. They do come with the oversized power handles on them. So either of those will be a little bit more traditional on the slow pitch setup. For the line to go onto these reels, we're typically looking at very, very thin braid. We're not pairing up the line on these reels like we would a traditional reel for setting up for yellowtail. So we might be using a PE braid, maybe like a 40-pound or a 30-pound, something that's going to cut through the water really well and allow your jig to have the freest range of motion and still telegraph, the bite, so you don't have all the stretch when you set the hook. Because remember, your rods are going to be pretty moderate. So we want to stay away from the monofilament where you're going to create a lot of drag and affect the action of the jigs. In terms of jigs, there's going to be a wide range. Everybody's seeing the market get flooded with all kinds of jigs. And in reality, there's as Ceasar touched upon earlier, there's no right or wrong. You can really make this your own. Taddy Lures has made some great truer to form slow pitch jigs. They're going to be all the weight is down at the end, and it's going to have a very hollowed out thin front end. Those jigs are going to have a lot of action with very, very little motion. That not always the most effective when there's a little bit of current. So make sure that you have a variety. They also made a good hybrid jig. So if you know you're going to be fishing maybe some deeper water and you're going to be targeting some fish in 250, 300 feet of water, a little bit of current, or maybe that afternoon wind is picking up, a good option would be switching over to their hybrid slow pitch jig. A little bit more diamond shape. It's not as concave, so you're going to lose some of that real fluttery action, but it's going to allow you to get to the bottom and still have some good fluttering. And there's, Daiwa has some great options, Shimano has some great options, and there's a plethora of other brands out there that you should look into. Whatever your local shop has, and if they don't have it, you could always look Sav-On up and come up here. We do have a good variety. One of the things I did forget to touch on with the rod and reel combos was our spinning combo. If you're trying to get into it, it's a lot going on when you're lifting the rod and winding the handle at the same time. Sometimes it takes a minute to get used to, and we really want to catch some fish. The spinning reel is something that I've done anything from 100-pound tuna on the slow pitch with a spinning reel all the way down to sand bass and sculpin on it, and it's a blast to start with. If you want to go high end on your offering, the Bay Jigger is going to be by Daiwa. That's going to be an offering that'll let you pull on some pretty hefty tuna for such a small little reel. It puts out I believe 50 pounds of drag out of this tiny little thing. And then you can also pair it up with one of the Phenix spinning rods or an Ocean Legacy spinning rod, and it does really well. If you want to get an ultra light setup, Ceasar talked about pairing it up with a Vanford. That is incredibly light. It's a feather in your hand. It'll let you fish these shallow water fish absolutely all day long. most people have trout setups that are heavier than that combo by the time it's done.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we fish that ultralight setup in our coastal shallow water fishing, inshore fisheries. We fish that ultralight combo up to about 200 feet. We fish maybe up to about 80 to 100 grams. Most of them like to fish about 60 grams on that rod. And we've gotten some beasts on there.
Yeah.
I mean, 15, 18-pound yellowtail, and guys are just looking at you like, what are you doing with this trout rod out here?
Yeah.
So I was wondering, for either of you guys, feel free to jump in and answer. One of the things I would love to understand is, I mean, everything looks super light compared to like your classic rail rod, you know, your heavy duty tuna rods, and these are like completely opposite. They basically, as you said, look like bass rods or trout rods even. Why is it like that? Why are the rods so light? Why is it designed like that, along with the reels just being a lot smaller?
Well, the whole design of the slow pitch rods are unlike a traditional rod where you have a fast action, a fast taper. You have a shutoff point that's further away from the angler, which you feel that you can get more lifting power on it because you have more. You think you have more leverage because it's sticking out further. Yeah. But realistically, when you take a rod and you bend it, and where it stops bending, you draw a straight line from where the rod stops bending, distance to your hand. That's the lever the fish has against you. So the longer the rod is, the further the shutoff is out front, the more leverage the fish actually has against you. So believe it or not, even these rods are soft and short, because it bends so far back, the fish that actually has less leverage on you, you can actually pull a lot harder on the fish. Especially with the reels nowadays. Most reels nowadays have tremendous amount of drag pressure, way more than anybody will ever possibly think they can use up to. I mean, we all think we can pull 30 pounds of drag, but realistically, it's not that easy to do. On these rods, because they're so much shorter, don't have that fish working against you, you can actually pull a lot heavier drags. For instance, on my ultralight, when I do fish a low profile reel or level wind reel, I fish the Lex T-Wing on mine, it gets 28 pounds of drag. And guys ask me, well, how much drag are you fishing on there? I go, well, turn my star. And they go turn, they're like, no, your star is stuck, it's buttoned. I'm like, that's how much drag I fish. I fish it all the way down to the max. And the rod will handle it. Yep. You know, and you'd be surprised how much fish you can get up on that just by the pressure of that reel. All the rod is doing there is keeping that line tension on the fish, keeping that hook buried in the fish. You're not really pulling. You're not trying to high stick and lift the fish with the rod. That rod is just keeping that hook pinned in the fish's mouth, keeping it in there, and then it's all in the reel. You know, you have all these high-tech reels with good gear ratios, heavy drag pressures. The reel can do the work, just have to have something to keep the hook pinned in there. And that's what that rod does. It keeps that hook pinned in the fish, doesn't let you pull so hard that you're ripping hooks out of the fish's mouths. It's just keeping it pinned in there. It's a big giant shock absorber, and it's all real. And it's easy because you're not fighting the rod, you're not having this big lever against you. Yeah. Tuck it under your arm, just hold it there and just wind. Real slow and steady. Yeah.
One of the things you'll notice as well, kind of what Ceasar's talking about, there's no foregrip on these rods. So when you're holding the rod, there's nothing on the front end, so you're not going to be touching this rod to the rail like we do a lot of our traditional rods when we get into trouble with a bigger fish. Or if we're fishing deep and we just get tired and we want to rest on the rail. When you're holding these, it's going to be you and that fish, and that was how it was designed. A lot of guys on private boats, they don't have the rail, so having that point of leverage coming a lot closer to home, a lot closer to you, is a lot easier for you to maintain your stamina, where you could fish, get that fish to the boat, and feel excited to drop back down and not feel bummed out. If you try to do that with an 8-foot fast action rod, you get really tired really quickly. So this system allows you to keep fishing and not rely on the rail. What we're seeing now is a lot more educated anglers going out on the sport boats. So with that, we're able to sell techniques that are going to be a lot more functional on the sport boat that maybe 10 years ago would not have been very practical. You could imagine if one guy's fishing a slow pitch jig and he's bent over the rail and he's pinned with a good fish and somebody has to get under him with a long 8-foot rod, that's where the conflict starts to happen. So we do recommend with the slow pitching, as everybody's getting it dialed in and figuring it out, find yourself a corner in the bow or midship where not a lot of people are going to be, trying to get around you, and really spend some time fishing that. It's a great, great tool. It's one of my favorite things. If you guys have fished with me on my rockfish trips, I love breaking this out. As soon as I get my first limit of quality rockfish, I'm breaking this out and just playing the rest of the day.
I get to be the one that asks like the silly questions first. So for someone who doesn't know as much about rods and reels and gear and such, can one of you, I noticed the guides are a little different, and those are acid wraps, and so no, the guides are not misplaced. And it's not a factory defect. But if I can ask one of you guys, what's the reason for that, and what's the benefit of having it acid wrapped?
Well, there's two real big benefits to acid wrapping or spiral wrapping a rod. One is that under load, the rod's not going to want to torque to the left or to the right. If you find that most guys are on top, when you put it under load, it's going to want to roll either over to the left or to the right. So it's going to cause a twisting action in your hand. Especially the heavier the rod, the more it's going to want to twist. Okay. The other thing is that you don't get a lot of tip wraps. So when you're working that jig up and down with that thin spectra, when it goes up, the jigs have so much action on the way down that they'll actually fall, and you'll have a lot of slack line up top. And a lot of times you'll get tip wraps from guys working that jig. Okay. And that's why the spiral wraps eliminate, not all, but eliminates a lot of the tip wraps or the potential of tip wraps, and it also keeps it from twisting in your hands.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ceasar, and thank you so much, Anthony, for talking about the rods, reels, and the jigs. And as we say in every single video, Anthony and I repeat ourselves over and over and over again. If you want to come into Sav-On, Anthony's happy to help you. He's a wealth of knowledge. But more than anything, just support your local shop. Wherever your shop is, go and support them and utilize the knowledge that they have at those stores.
Absolutely, because what it comes down to is that's where your knowledge comes from. Your local knowledge is going to come from your local shops. Ordering online is great for saving money, but you're going to miss a lot of information that you won't get from your local tackle shop.
And then for sure, when it comes to rod and reels, it's so much better to hold it.
Absolutely. You always want to touch and feel everything before you buy it.
Yeah.
You know, you got to see it, you got to feel it, because it might not be what you want. What somebody recommends to you, it might be something that's their preference, it might not be your preference. So it's always better to go in there physically, look at it, pull on it, ask the questions. You know, there's no such thing as a right reel or a wrong reel. It's whatever you like to fish with.
When you're picking out your rods, one of the most important things to do is going to be to pair your rod up with the jigs that you're looking to use. And that's going to be on your jigs or on the packaging. There'll be a size on there, usually in grams, because a lot of this stuff is still coming over from overseas, be it Australia, Japan, where the stuff's a little bit more prevalent. As it gets introduced to the US, we'll be converting, so an easy way, 28 grams for an ounce. So on the rod, a lot of the rods are going to be rated, whether it'll say 100 to 200 grams. If you're looking at a 180 gram jig, we're going to want to pair that with the rod. So you could kind of say, well, I usually fish 10 to 12 ounce weights when I'm rock fishing. You could fish anywhere from like a 6 to a 10 ounce jig to cover that current. So you're going to want to look for a rod that's going to have the same weight rating for that jig. It's not based on the size of fish you're catching. You can catch a really big fish on a really thin, flimsy rod when you're using this system. So really pair those jigs up with the line rating on the rod and the rod up with the jigs that you're looking to purchase based on how deep you're fishing and the amount of current that's typically in that area that you're looking to fish.
Yeah, that's so good and important, something I'm learning through my conversations with you guys, and that's going to kind of lead us into this next part where we talk about, I mean, Anthony's already kind of explained a lot of it, is how to choose your rod and reel depending on what you're targeting, or how does that work? I don't even know if I'm saying it right.